the Sons of Liberty, the Liberty Boys, and the men who fought for the human rights of the people in the colonies. The Sons of Liberty were the men who instigated the War on Independence. You see, the revolution did not begin as a complete revolt. It was simply men who wanted their rights back. While Britain was in poverty, the colonies flourished. So Britain's only way out was to tax the colonies on everything they possibly could. The first act upon this was the Sugar Act. Britain put a tax on every single item which was included in the Sugar Act that was being sold in the colonies. The Sugar Act led to the Stamp Act, which pushed the colonists over the edge. Because of the taxation, many leaders emerged. Included in these are some of America's most famous men who would later be called the Founding Fathers: Samuel Adams, John Hancock, and Paul Revere. There were many more who shaped our nation, but these are the ones that started the Sons of Liberty and was led by none other than Samuel Adams. Now, everyone knows Sam as the guy who drank beer and is well the beer company, but that is just the tip of the iceberg. Samuel Adams was a huge part of the American Revolution. Without his hot-headed temper, we could have never become a country. Samuel was the poorer of the two Adams. John was rich and well-educated, and Samuel was less educated. John and Samuel saw things a little differently. Samuel was the one who rallied the colonies into a whole. Samuel Adams had had enough of the British. The Liberty Boys and the Sons were used to rile up the Loyalists, and guess what? It worked. The Boston Tea Party was an act of the Sons. Without the Sons and Boys, Britain would have never gotten the message that the Englishmen were sick and tired of the control they were under, so they had fought back. Samuel Adams ran the Sons of Liberty like a guerrilla army, working by night, forcing the British officials to work for the cause of liberty. At times, the Sons and Founding Fathers would gather at the Green Dragon Tavern, which was, well, a tavern. The two places that were used were the Liberty Tree and the tavern. The Liberty Boys were the young men who wanted to fight for the newly forming nation. In Boston in 1770, a young boy who was a member of the Liberty Boys was shot and killed by a British official. This was the first death for the cause of liberty. The death of Christopher Sider broke the hearts of the people. At the funeral of the boy, Samuel Adams used it as a soapbox to rally. After the death of an 11-year-old, the people were outraged, and the war had been sparked. I'm going to define a few things so what I just said makes sense. The Liberty Pole. The Liberty Pole was a pole that stood in Boston. The red cap on top stood as the Liberty Cap. The symbol of the red cap was used after the assassination of Julius Caesar. The cap had originated in the Netherlands. The Liberty Tree was simply an elm tree that stood in Boston. It was the gathering place for the Sons throughout the fight. This was the first place they gathered to oppose the British government. As for Liberty Hall, it was simply the area that surrounded the Liberty Tree. Now for the Liberty Boys. They were led by Dr. Joseph Warren. Joseph Warren was in charge of the spying part of the Sons, and who better to spy than young boys who would never be thought to be spies? Warren had connections to Thomas Gage's wife, who was born and raised in the States. Some historians believe that his wife was the key to some of the information given to Warren about the British. Now, Adams was a propagandist, so there was tons of propaganda about the Sons and the fight for independence. To this day, many of them are still used. A couple of the most famous is the Don't Tread on Me flag, one of my personal favorites, and the Join or Die snake. Some might think his propaganda was a little overboard, and it may have been, but it sure got out the message he wanted. The Sons of Liberty and the Liberty Boys began in 1765. They were what riled up the people in the colonies to fight for their land and rights. In the beginning, the men didn't look for the freedom, they just wanted their rights back. But without the relentless fight from Samuel Adams, our country most likely would have never been formed. These men pushed Britain into a place where they had to address the men as a real threat. A secret organization that pushed both the British and the Americans into a war that would form the once captive cities into the freest nation in the world. The men disbanded in 1776 when the Stamp Act was repealed. They had accomplished what they intended and started a war that would be heard around the world. Although the Sons were a rebellion, those men earned the title of Founding Fathers.